Green Falls is a small town in southern Alabama, a place where the streets are lined with old oak trees and the coffee shop only opens from 6 a.m. until noon. There, everyone knows each other, who lives alone, who just fixed their roof, even who often forgets to lock their car door, all become stories shared over breakfast. David Rourke lived at the end of Jefferson Street in a small, weathered wooden house. He was 36, had never married, spoke little, and always carried a contemplative look on his face. No one truly knew much about David except for one thing: he used to be a soldier. 2 tours in Afghanistan had left him with a long scar on his left shoulder and eyes that always seemed to be remembering some distant place. After his discharge, David returned to Green Falls and got a job at a local auto garage. He worked hard, never complained, and was always willing to stay late to help customers without charging extra. But even so, David remained a man few people approached. Maybe because he didn't talk much. Maybe because his eyes sometimes made others hesitate. The town maintained a long-standing tradition. Each year, during Veterans Memorial Week, Green Falls High School hosted a formal ceremony. There were speeches, student performances, a choir, and honored guests veterans from the area. This year, the principal, Miss Ellen Granger, decided to invite David Rourke. When he received the invitation letter, David had intended to decline. He had never liked crowds, and even less so standing in front of one. But it was the mother of a student, Mrs. Doris Mayfield, who had lost her husband in the Vietnam War, who came directly to the garage and said, "David, I believe there are things only those who've seen the battlefield can share with these kids. You don't have to speak. Just being there is enough." David nodded. He thought perhaps sitting in the front row of a school auditorium wouldn't be too hard. He had once driven an armored vehicle through the Helmand night. Surely he could sit still for an hour? But he didn't know. Someone had written his name down on the performance list. A student, either as a joke or a misunderstanding, had added, "David Rourke, singing performance." Rumors spread quickly. In the cafeteria, students whispered, "That veteran guy's gonna sing? Must be some military song, huh? Maybe he's doing the national anthem? No way. Is it gonna be war rap?" A few chuckles, a few sideways glances. When Miss Granger saw David's name on the list, she had planned to cross it out. But when she asked him, David fell silent. Then he said something that surprised her. "If my name's on the list, I'll sing." The principal was stunned, but asked no further. Perhaps even she sensed something solemn in that husky voice. That evening, David went home. He opened an old wooden box he hadn't touched in a long time. Inside were a few letters from old comrades, a bronze medal, and a wrinkled piece of sheet music. "Bring Him Home," a song he once heard another soldier sing in 2011 at a field base on a rainy night. He wasn't a singer, but something stirred inside him. Maybe it was the faces he once saw, faces now gone forever. Maybe it was the words he had never said. David sat down and quietly read the lyrics. "Lord, bring him home, bring him home." He didn't sing loudly, but each word felt like it was drawn from a chest that had held them in for years. And so, he began to practice. Alone, no music, no instruments, just a rough voice, and memories serving as background harmony. Veterans Memorial Week was approaching. No one could have expected that the quiet soldier of Green Falls was about to do something the whole town would never forget. On Friday morning, the town of Green Falls woke up under a thin veil of mist covering the rooftops. The early winter breeze rustled dry leaves beneath the feet of passers-by. At Green Falls High School, students were neatly dressed in uniform. The seats in the auditorium had been arranged. The national flag was hoisted high above the stage, and in the front row, chairs reserved for veterans were draped in red cloth. David Rourke arrived early. He wore his old ceremonial uniform, neatly pressed, every crease precise, as dictated in the training manual. On his chest, the Bronze Star Medal quietly shimmered under the auditorium lights. He entered without a sound, nodding slightly when the gate guard greeted him. "Morning, Mr. Rourke. Thank you for coming." David merely smiled and found his seat in the second row on the right side of the stage. He glanced around. Students were starting to take their places. There were giggles, a few curious looks, some subtle pointing. David paid no attention. The ceremony began at 9 a.m. with the flag salute. Then came Principal Granger's speech, solemn, proper, emphasizing military tradition and gratitude for the veterans. A student recited a poem. The choir performed "God Bless America." Then the loudspeaker rang out. Next, we invite former Sergeant David Rourke, who served 2 tours in Afghanistan, to present a special musical performance. Someone froze. Some students looked bewildered. A few soft chuckles were heard from the back of the auditorium, quickly silenced by the stern glance of a teacher. David stepped onto the stage. No microphone, no background music, no further introduction. He simply stood there, a man with slightly graying hair, steady eyes, and tightly clasped hands, as if holding something fragile inside him. He took a deep breath. Then, he began to sing. "God on high, hear my prayer." His voice wasn't loud. It wasn't refined. But there was something in the way he sang that instantly erased the whispers. It was the voice of someone who had lived through fire and gunfire. The sound of a man who had faced life and death, and now only wished for others to return safely. He didn't look at anyone in the hall. He stared straight ahead, as if singing to a fallen friend, to a mother still waiting on the porch, to his own self from years past in the middle of the night, in a sandstorm. Bring him peace, bring him joy. He is young, he is only a boy. A student in the middle row put down his phone. A teacher set aside the pen she was using to take notes. An old man, perhaps the father of someone in the school, pulled a handkerchief from his coat pocket. No one moved. No one spoke. The final line rang out like a whisper at an altar. "Bring him home." And then, silence. Absolute silence. No one clapped right away. No one exclaimed. Only a heavy stillness filled the room, as if every person in the auditorium was holding something tightly in their chest, unwilling to let it go too soon. David bowed slightly, then turned and walked away, as quietly as he had arrived. But before he could leave the stage, a sound broke the silence. Someone stood up. It was from the front row, an elderly teacher, long retired, who still attended the ceremony each year. He stood tall, placed a hand over his heart, and said nothing. Another person rose. Then a third. Then the entire auditorium stood, not in unison, not in rhythm, but as if something deep within each of them could no longer remain seated. And then applause began, not loud, not boisterous, but full of reverence. Applause for a soldier, for a man, for a voice that was imperfect but profoundly sincere. At the back of the hall, Miss Granger wiped her eyes, and one woman, Mrs. Clara Jensen, a music director from New York, there to support her 11th grade grandson, quietly wrote the name David Rourke on the back of a business card. She knew she had just witnessed something rare, a voice untrained, but capable of cutting through every wall, every bias, every age, because it sang with memory and with soul. The ceremony ended in a reflective hush. The applause that followed wasn't just for the performances, but also an echo of the moment David stood alone on stage. No microphone, no special lighting, just a slightly trembling voice, like a prayer sent to those soldiers who never came home. David didn't linger. He left the auditorium as soon as the program ended, avoiding handshakes and awkward questions. He just wanted to return to the garage, where the smell of motor oil and the steady sound of hammering made him feel at ease. But before he could exit the parking lot, a voice called from behind. "Sergeant Rourke?" David turned around. A woman in her early 50s, wearing an ash-gray knit coat and thin-rimmed glasses, was approaching him with a polite smile. She held out a business card. "I'm Clara Jensen, Artistic Director of the New York Voices Choir. I came here to support my grandson, but truthfully, it was you who I couldn't take my eyes off." David glanced at the card in her hand. His eyes narrowed slightly, cautious. "I'm not a singer, ma'am," he said quietly, his voice dry. "Exactly why I want to hear more," she replied, her tone still gentle. "We have a special program, Veterans Voices, where we invite veterans with musical ability to train and perform at major events, not for pity, but to tell their own stories through music." David remained silent for a moment. He didn't know what to say. The thought of standing before a large audience again made his chest tighten. Clara seemed to sense that. "There's no obligation," she said. We're just inviting you to visit a recording studio in Nashville, a private, quiet space. You can pick any song you want. We'll take care of the rest." She carefully tore a small sheet from her notebook and wrote down the studio address and contact number. Then she pulled out a small envelope and placed it in David's hand. "Plane tickets, hotel arrangements, everything's ready if you agree. You have 2 weeks. If you're not interested, just forget it. But if even a small part of you wants to speak, I believe the world needs to hear it." David held the envelope but didn't open it. He simply nodded in farewell. That evening, David sat alone in his kitchen. He poured a cup of black tea and opened the envelope. A round-trip ticket from Birmingham to Nashville. A scheduled studio session. A short handwritten note from Clara in blue ink. "You don't have to sing like an artist. Just sing like a father who hasn't come home, a friend who fell, a man who survived." David folded the note and sat in silence for a long while. He thought of his squadmate Robbie, who had sung "Bring Him Home" on Christmas night, 2012, in a medic tent. Robbie didn't make it back, but his voice still lingered in David's memory, like it was just yesterday. And then David thought, if I sing, it won't just be me speaking. It'll be those who no longer can. A week later, David stepped into the Nashville recording studio wearing an old button-up shirt and carrying a small notebook. He brought no instrument, no assistant, just a soldier who had laid down his weapon, but never his memories. Clara was waiting in the lobby. When she saw him, she simply smiled. "I knew you'd come." The studio was quiet, almost like a chapel. David stood before the microphone, headphones on. He heard the soft intro playing behind him. Then his voice began, this time not trembling, but calm and deeper than before. "God on high, hear my prayer." When it ended, no one in the studio said anything for a few seconds. Then the sound engineer, a man who had worked with dozens of famous artists, let out a soft breath. "You just made the whole room hold its breath." Clara said nothing. She only placed a hand on David's shoulder. "That voice needs no technique. It's a witness." 1 month after the recording session in Nashville, David Rourke received a call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was Clara Jensen, her voice warm but tinged with excitement. "David," she said, "your recording has touched more hearts than we ever expected. I know you're not seeking attention, but I have something to ask." David was sitting at his kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee, morning sunlight spilling across his shoulder through the window. "We're organizing a tribute concert for veterans at Lincoln Center in New York on the 11th of November, Veterans Day. It's a live televised event, bringing together choirs, musicians, and former service members. I want you to perform that song on the big stage." David was silent. A part of him wanted to say no, but another part, the part that had stepped onto the stage in Green Falls, the part that had opened his voice in the studio, now urged him to speak. "Will I have to wear my uniform again?" he asked, half serious, half joking. Clara laughed. "No, David. That day you won't be a soldier. You'll be a storyteller, through music." New York City greeted David Rourke with its signature intensity, honking horns, glittering streetlights, towering buildings that seemed to touch the sky. But inside David, everything was strangely calm. He was brought to a hotel near Lincoln Center, where other performers were also staying. Some recognized him after the recording had been widely shared. His name had appeared in a few local articles and radio programs, but David didn't care about the attention. He only wanted to stay true to the promise he made himself, to sing for those who no longer had the chance. That night, the backstage of Lincoln Center glowed brightly. Sound engineers, lighting crews, musicians, artists all moved like a perfectly synchronized machine. David was led to a small room to change not into his uniform, but into a simple charcoal gray suit. On his sleeve, a small badge read, "Veterans' Voices." Clara approached him before the show. "You don't need to do anything but be yourself," she said. "We're not asking you to win over the audience. We just hope you'll help them listen." David nodded, but inside, his heart was beginning to race. 20 minutes later, the host walked onto the main stage. The lights dimmed. The 2,700-seat hall fell silent. The introduction echoed. "And now, please turn your attention to a special performance. A soldier returned from war, bringing not only memories, but a voice straight from the heart. Please welcome David Rourke. Alone, David stepped into the spotlight. He couldn't make out any faces in the crowd, but from the gentle light washing over the seats, he could feel their focus. No one moved. No one laughed. No one expected anything flashy. Then the piano began, soft, just enough to support his voice without overwhelming it. David closed his eyes and began to sing, "God on high, hear my prayer." He didn't try to sing well. He simply repeated what he had once whispered in the dark, when Robbie was wounded, when the helicopter didn't arrive in time, when his hands trembled writing letters to the families of fallen comrades. Those memories no longer choked him. They became each line slow, steady, and reverent. "Bring him home, bring him home." When the final note faded, David opened his eyes. The hall was still silent. But this time, he wasn't afraid, because he knew. Not everyone may stand and clap loudly, but everyone had heard. And then, just like in Green Falls, someone stood. A veteran in the front row. He placed his hand over his heart. Then a second person stood. Then the entire auditorium. Applause rose hesitant at first, then swelling like a wave. In the guest section, a journalist was wiping away tears. Another elderly soldier whispered to his wife, "That's our song." Clara stood backstage, saying nothing. She knew this moment belonged solely to David and to the souls he sang for. After the performance at Lincoln Center, David Rourke returned to Green Falls in the quiet he had always known. There were no cheering crowds, no cameras or reporters. Just the small road leading home, his old pickup truck, and the scent of damp wood after the rain. But something had changed. The mailbox in front of his house, usually filled with utility bills, now occasionally held a few letters. One was from a mother in Iowa whose son served in the Navy. A postcard from a World War II veteran, handwritten in shaky script. "You sang for an entire generation of us." One letter bore no name, only the words, "I cried because of you." David read every line. He didn't reply, but he kept them all in a tin box. As if each letter was a piece of something he'd never thought he had a voice, a connection that stretched beyond battlefields and memory. One December afternoon, as the northern wind began slipping through the door frames, David received a pale yellow envelope. In the top left corner was the seal of Green Falls High School. He assumed it was an invitation to the school's Christmas program, but inside was only a single folded sheet of paper with one short line written in a student's slightly slanted handwriting. "Dear Mr. David, my name is Lily Matthews, Class 8B. I was one of the kids who laughed when we heard you were going to sing. I'm sorry. That day, I didn't think someone like you could do anything that moved people, but when you started to sing, I couldn't breathe. I thought of my dad. He left when I was 5 and never came back. I never cried about it. Not until I heard you sing. After the ceremony, I signed up for the drama club. I'll be singing for the first time next week. I'm really scared. But I remember that you dared to stand up there, so I'll try too. Thank you for singing with your heart." "Lily?" David placed the letter on the table. He didn't say anything, but his eyes turned toward the window where the sunset stained the bare trees a deep red, as if seeing something distant and beautiful. The following spring, Clara Jensen called again. "We just received a new grant," she said. "They want to expand the Veterans Voices program to rural schools. And they've nominated you as co-founder." David was surprised. "Me? I'm not a teacher." "Exactly," Clara replied. "They don't need a music professor. They need someone who stood on stage with an honest heart, someone the kids can believe in." David didn't answer right away, but the next morning, he called back. "I'll do it, as long as there are no elevators and no tight vests." Clara chuckled. "You can wear whatever you like as long as you keep singing." RE2. The Veterans Voices program began traveling across the American South. Each month, David visited a different school telling stories, sharing memories, and sometimes simply sitting down to listen when a child said they felt sad. He didn't sing everywhere, but when the moment felt right, he raised his voice again. No microphone, no instrument, just the voice of a man who had walked through fire and found himself again in music. At the end of every session, he always said the same words. Kids, the world has plenty of loud voices. What it lacks are honest ones. If there's a song in your heart, don't wait for permission. Just sing. Years later, on a national television program honoring inspirational Americans, David Rourke, now gray-haired and speaking more slowly, was invited to appear. The host asked him, "What moment changed your life the most since that day on the stage at Green Falls?" David looked into the camera, then gently smiled. "It was when a little girl wrote me a letter saying she would sing because I did. That's when I realized, singing isn't so people remember you, it's so they remember they have a voice too." And so, the story of Sergeant David Rourke comes to a close, not with gunfire, not with battle hymns, but with a quiet song that made the world pause and listen. If this story moved you, please leave a comment, share it, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. Your support gives us the motivation to continue telling heartfelt, emotional, and hopeful stories like this one. We'll see you again on the next journey.